Hey everyone, and a really warm welcome back. This is Season 6, Episode 3 of LexTalk podcast, exploring English and linguistics right here in Thailand.
Great to be back.
We are so glad you're tuning in. Today, we're going to unpack something pretty central to English language education.
That's right. Language testing and assessment.
Exactly. What are we actually trying to figure out when we test English skills? And, why does it matter so much for teachers, for parents, for anyone really interested in English learning in Thailand?
It's a huge question.
Yeah.
And it goes way beyond just, getting a grade. It shapes classroom practice, how students feel about learning.
Absolutely. It influences curriculum, motivation, policy even. We'll look at, well, the traditional stuff, but also some newer approaches too.
It's a big topic, but really important.
So if you're involved in English education here in Thailand, this deep dive is definitely for you. We'll cover the practical side, but also sort of the critical view. Why we test, the impact. Okay, before we properly jump in, just that quick reminder. Don't forget to follow LexTalk on all our platforms.
Yeah. Website, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, SoundCloud, Spotify.
Just search for @LexTalk Podcast. Okay, let's get started. So why does language testing actually matter? Why all the focus?
Well, fundamentally, assessment does a few key jobs. It's how we often get an initial read on a student's level, right?
Right, like placement.
Exactly.
Oh, wow.
And tracking their progress over time. Think about grades. They have real consequences for students' paths.
And placing them in the right groups or programs. People often mention CEFR for that, don't they?
Yes, frameworks like the CEFR are often used to benchmark levels for placement, which relies heavily on some kind of initial assessment.
And it strikes me, what gets tested often ends up being what gets taught. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. That's a really key point. If the big final exam is, say, heavily weighted towards grammar accuracy.
Then teachers will naturally spend more time drilling grammar rules in class. Makes sense.
It does. It's called washback, the effect of testing on teaching and learning. And sometimes it's intentional, sometimes less so, but it definitely steers the ship.
And what about the student's perspective? Motivation, confidence?
Huge impact there. A good testing experience, feeling like you've shown what you know, that can be a massive confidence booster. Really motivating.
Yeah, that feeling of I can do this
Yeah.
is so important.
But the flip side is also true. A really difficult or maybe poorly designed test can really knock a student's confidence.
Make them feel like they just aren't good at English, even if that's not really the case.
Exactly. And we see very concrete examples of this impact here in Thailand. Think about the ONET scores.
Right. They play a significant role in university admissions, don't they?
Right.
And scholarships, too, sometimes.
Definitely. That's a major national example. And then you have the international standardized tests.
Like IELTS or TOEFL.
Precisely. For many Thai students and professionals, getting a certain score on IELTS or TOEFL is the key to studying abroad, getting scholarships, or even certain job opportunities.
So these tests aren't just academic exercises. They genuinely open doors. Or close them.
They carry a lot of weight. So yeah, testing really matters.
Okay, so it matters. But testing isn't just one thing. There are loads of different kinds of tests, right? Can you help us sort through them?
Sure. We can group them based on their main purpose. First up, you mentioned placement tests.
Yeah, for getting students into the right level class.
Exactly. Their goal is to gauge a learner's current proficiency to put them in an appropriate learning group, often using scales like the CEFR as a reference point.
So a language school needs this to make sure beginners aren't overwhelmed and advanced learners aren't bored.
Right. Then there's formative assessment. This is quite different.
How so?
Formative assessment is more like ongoing monitoring. It happens during the learning process. Think low-stakes quizzes, class activities, exit tickets.
Exit tickets. Like write one thing you learned today.
Yeah, things like that. Quick checks. The main goal isn't a grade. It's feedback for the teacher to see who's getting it, and for the student to understand their own progress. It guides the next steps in teaching and learning.
Okay, so that's learning as it happens. What about measuring learning after it's happened? Like at the end of a unit or semester?
That's summative assessment. These are the evaluations used to measure overall learning at a particular endpoint.
Midterms, final exams.
Midterms, finals, project grades, standardized tests like ONET or even IELTS in some contexts, they all fall under summative. They summarize the learning that has taken place.
Got it. Placement to start, formative along the way, summative at the end. Are there other important types?
Yes, diagnostic tests are also really useful.
Diagnostic. like diagnosing a problem.
Kind of. They're designed to identify specific strengths and, importantly, weaknesses a learner has. Maybe they're great with vocabulary but struggle with listening comprehension. Or their writing fluency is good but accuracy is low.
Ah, so it helps teachers pinpoint exactly where a student needs extra help.
Precisely. It allows for much more targeted instruction and support. Very valuable for individualizing learning.
That makes a lot of sense. And then you have those big international ones we mentioned earlier, IELTS, TOEFL, TOEIC. What category do they fit into?
Those are generally called proficiency tests.
Proficiency. Okay, what makes them distinct?
The key thing about proficiency tests is that they are not tied to a specific course or curriculum. They aim to assess someone's overall ability to use the language in real-world contexts, regardless of how they learned it.
So it doesn't matter if you learned in school, online, or living abroad.
Nope. It's about your current ability to function in English across various situations. That's why universities and employers often use them. They provide a supposedly common standard.
Okay, that clarifies the different types. Now, thinking about what these tests actually assess, the 4 skills, right? Listening, speaking, reading, writing.
The core skills, yes. And how we test them varies quite a bit.
It always feels like listening and reading get tested more often, or maybe just more easily, in those big tests. Why is that?
Well, there's a practical reason. Listening and reading are receptive skills. They often lend themselves better to standardized, objective scoring methods.
Like multiple choice questions.
Exactly. Multiple choice, fill in the blanks, matching. Based on audio clips or reading passages, you can have a clear right or wrong answer, which makes scoring very consistent and theoretically reliable. You can machine score them even.
Right, much quicker and cheaper than having humans grade essays or interviews.
It is, but that practicality comes with potential downsides.
What do you mean?
Well, assessing the productive skills speaking and writing is inherently more complex. How do you objectively score someone's fluency, or the coherence of their argument, or their pronunciation?
Yeah, it seems much more subjective. Different teachers might give different scores for the same speech or essay.
That's the challenge. You need very clear rubrics, extensive rater training, and moderation processes to achieve fairness and reliability. It's much harder and more expensive to do well at scale.
So there's a risk we end up over-testing the skills that are easier to measure objectively, like reading for grammar details.
And potentially under-testing skills, like spontaneous conversation or persuasive writing, which are arguably very important for real communication.
And this could feed back into the classroom, right? If the tests focus heavily on reading grammar.
Then teaching might lean that way too, even if the goal is broader communicative competence. We need to be conscious of balancing the assessment across all 4 skills.
We definitely see that sometimes here in Thailand. Students can ace grammar sections on tests but feel really hesitant or struggle to actually speak.
That's a classic example of the potential disconnect. It really highlights the need for a balanced assessment approach, which brings us to thinking about what makes a good test in the first place.
Okay, what are the key ingredients?
There are 3 big concepts usually: validity, reliability, and practicality.
Right, let's break those down. Validity first, what's that about?
Validity, simply put, means the test measures what it claims to measure.
So it's actually testing the right thing.
Yes. If you want to know if someone can write a business email, a test asking them to identify parts of speech isn't very valid for that purpose. A valid test would actually have them write a business email. The test content and format should match the intended skill or knowledge.
Makes sense. Test what you want to know. What about reliability?
Reliability is about consistency. If the same student took the same test twice, without learning more in between, would they get a similar score? If 2 different trained markers scored the same essay, would they give similar grades?
So it's about whether the results are stable and dependable, not just random luck or dependent on who's marking it.
Exactly. We want the score to reflect the student's actual ability, not random error or inconsistency in the test or the scoring.
Okay, valid, reliable. And the third one was practicality.
Practicality. This covers the logistical side of things. How much does the test cost to develop and administer? How long does it take? Is it easy to score? Does it require special equipment or highly trained staff?
So even if a test is super valid and reliable, if it takes days to mark or costs a fortune, schools might not be able to use it.
That's the reality. A test might be theoretically excellent, but completely impractical for, say, a large public school system with limited resources.
So the dream is a test that's perfectly valid, perfectly reliable, and perfectly practical.
That's the ideal, but it's often incredibly difficult to achieve all three simultaneously. There are usually trade-offs.
How so?
Well, making a test highly reliable, especially for speaking or writing, might involve complex procedures that reduce its practicality. Focusing too much on easy-to-score formats for practicality might lower the validity for assessing real communication skills.
So educators and test designers have to make choices balancing these factors.
Exactly. It's about making informed decisions, understanding the strengths and limitations of different assessment approaches, and choosing what best fits the specific purpose and context while being aware of the compromises involved. Finding that perfect balance is rare.
That's a really crucial insight.
Yeah.
It's not about finding the perfect test, but understanding the balance. Now, thinking beyond these traditional test formats, are there other ways to assess language learning?
Oh, absolutely. And there's a growing movement towards using alternative assessment methods, often alongside traditional ones.
Like what?
One popular one is portfolio assessment.
Portfolios. Like an artist's portfolio.
Sort of. Students collect samples of their language work over time, maybe writing assignments, audio recordings of speaking tasks, project work, self-reflections.
Ah, so it shows their development, not just a single snapshot.
Exactly. It can provide a much richer, more holistic picture of their learning journey, their strengths, weaknesses, and progress. It often includes student reflection on the pieces, too.
I like that. It feels more developmental. What else?
Peer assessment can be very effective, too.
Students grading each other. Does that work?
It can if it's structured properly with clear criteria or rubrics. Students evaluate their classmates' work. It's not just about giving feedback to the other student. The act of evaluating helps the assessor internalize the standards and reflect on their own work, too.
Interesting. So it's a learning experience for both sides.
Definitely. It fosters critical thinking and understanding of the learning goals. Then there's self-assessment.
Students assessing themselves.
Yes, encouraging learners to reflect on their own performance, identify areas they need to work on, and set goals. It builds metacognitive awareness, understanding how you learn, which is incredibly valuable.
So it empowers the learner to take ownership.
Precisely. And related to testing real communication, there are performance-based tasks.
What does that involve?
These require students to actively use the language to accomplish a task, often one that mimics a real-world situation.
Examples.
Things like participating in a debate, conducting an interview, giving a presentation, performing a role play, writing a response to a realistic email scenario.
So tasks that actually show if they can do something with the language.
Exactly. They focus on communicative competence in action, which is often what we ultimately care about.
These alternatives sound really valuable for getting a broader picture.
They are. And a practical tip for teachers here in Thailand. You don't have to choose only one method. Often, the best approach is a blend.
You mean combine different types?
Yes. Maybe use short traditional quizzes for checking specific points, but combine that with longer-term projects, portfolio pieces, peer feedback, and some performance-based speaking assessments. That mix gives you a much more well-rounded view of a student's abilities than relying solely on one type of test.
That makes a lot of sense. Use different tools for different parts of the picture.
Right.
Okay, so pulling all this together, it seems clear that assessment is, well, it's way more than just assigning a grade.
Definitely. It should be seen as a mirror reflecting learning and, crucially, as a tool to guide and improve both teaching and learning.
So the focus shouldn't just be on the score itself.
Ideally, no. As educators, parents, everyone involved, we should aim to choose and use assessment tools and methods that genuinely support student growth, provide meaningful feedback, and help learners move forward, rather than just ranking them or creating anxiety around scores.
That's a really powerful message to end on. Focus on growth and feedback. This has been incredibly insightful, really unpacking the complexities of language testing. Thank you.
My pleasure. It's a vital conversation to keep having, especially as education continues to evolve here in Thailand and globally.
And speaking of evolving discussions, our next deep dive, episode 4 of season 6, will look at something fascinating: the role of corpus linguistics in teaching English.
Ooh, that
Well-
sounds interesting. A different angle entirely.
It should be great, so definitely tune in for that one. And please don't forget to follow LexTalk on all our platforms: website, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, SoundCloud, Spotify.
At LexTalk Podcast.
And do share this deep dive with any colleagues, educators, or maybe testing coordinators here in Thailand who might find it useful.
Let's spread the knowledge and support each other.
Oh, absolutely. Let's talk. Let's learn. Let's Lex talk.